October 12, 1945. Kagoshima Bay, southern Kyushu. The dawn haze still clung to the water like damp silk when Ensign Hiroshi Nakazawa felt the glider's canvas wing shiver. The rising thermals were weak this morning. Bad omen. He tasted salt on his lips and powdered aluminum from the cockpit rails. The Tsurugi's nose dipped, caught its breath, and leveled. No engine, just the wind, just the buoy, just this ridiculous thing pinned to the sky. 300 meters below, the Imperial Japanese Navy's destroyer Sakawa kicked up a knife-edge wake. Its bridge crew watched the practice sortie with expressions that sat somewhere between boredom and embarrassment. Someone laughed through the signal pipes. "The paper wings are flying again." Another voice, older, harsher. "Better they crash here than embarrass us in front of the Americans." 16-year-olds in school uniforms the year before, now wearing flight goggles 2 sizes too big. The Tsurugi gliders were nothing more than spruce frames and lacquered cloth, built to be expendable. They were meant to die without exploding, to lure, to distract, to waste enemy fuel and attention while the real fleet moved unseen. On the horizon, Nakazawa saw the sunlight flash across the hard angles of a second glider. That was Petty Airman, 3rd Class, Kitamura, 18, the eldest of the squad. Kitamura wagged his wings. A signal, Corsairs sighted in training reel from yesterday. Pattern likely repeats. The boys were told to forget heroism, forget duels, forget kills. Their job was humiliation by design, fluttering bait for the big American fighters that hunted like wolves. The Navy called it Jikibakusen, direct exposure craft. The pilots called it something else. Kyofu no Tobikite. The flying scarecrows. But they kept flying. Because boys obey orders. The deck officers smoked and watched the gliders wobble in thermals. Someone muttered about how absurd this all was, that no American pilot would ever be fool enough to chase these paper children. And everyone laughed, a dry, exhausted laughter that always ended too quickly in 1945. Below the smoke horizon, 2 more Tsurugi were winched from a truck bed toward the slip. Fresh recruits, still adjusting their harnesses, stepped barefoot on hot steel. Their commanding instructor, Lieutenant Commander Tatsuo Fujikami, didn't laugh. He stared at the pale wings and thought of how little time was left for Japan and how even less for these boys. He argued that a Decoy pilot needed the temperament of a hunter, not a child. The Admiralty had disagreed. "They only need to be visible," the memo had said, "not lethal." At 07:14, the radios crackled from the Sakawa's bridge. Not training now, real intercept. A spotter plane from the 11th Air Fleet had picked up American Corsairs sweeping in from the south, returning from strikes on coastal depots. 12 aircraft, fast, armed, curious. The mockery died instantly. Ash from cigarettes drifted into coffee cups. The boys in the gliders banked toward the ocean, catching the first cold seam of air off the bay cliffs. The fragile wings trembled again, only this time from adrenaline. Above them, the sun ignited the sky into a sheet of molten brass. Below them, war finally came into view. And somewhere in that fragile gap between instruction and instinct, a terrifying thought flickered through Lieutenant Commander Fujikami's mind, a thought he would never admit aloud. What happens if the Americans actually take the bait? He didn't know the answer yet. But the boys were about to find out. The first glider broke toward the open sea like a gull startled from a cliff face. Kitamura leaned his slight frame into the control bar, coaxing the Tsurugi's wing to bite the wind. The canvas groaned, ribs flexed. The entire aircraft weighed less than a motorcycle. One careless gust could end it. Nakazawa followed, banking wide, letting his glider slide into a shallow dive until the ocean rose to meet him in glittering shards. He could smell brine through the cockpit slits, taste the morning air, thin, metallic, and trembling with urgency. The American Corsairs came into view as black flecks, low on the horizon, 12 F4U-1DS, their inverted gull wings unmistakable even at distance. They were angled homeward, lazy and confident, riding the thermals in loose formation. Their engines pulsed against the morning sky, 11 cylinders each, rhythm like a distant hammer on steel. No one had told the boys what to do if the enemy didn't notice. The doctrine assumed ridicule, not invisibility. But now, as the Corsairs closed the gap, the vibration in the air changed. It wasn't laughter anymore, it was tension. From his post on the Sakawa's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Fujikami leaned forward, binoculars cutting trenches around his eyes. He was looking for the smallest tell, wing waggle, trailing smoke, a break in formation, any sign the Americans had spotted the gliders. At 0727, the first Corsair dipped, a test. Another followed. Engines snarled like beasts scenting prey. "You can almost hear them deciding," Fujikami murmured. The Americans closed fast. The lead fighter rolled, peeling off in a half-scissor. That was Lieutenant John Halpin, VF-116, a pilot known for his aggression and impatience. He was 22, still young enough to feel invincible, old enough to know better. Through his canopy, Halpin saw exactly what the Japanese officers had mocked: children in cloth toys, no propellers, no heat signatures, just flimsy little silhouettes skating above the water. His first instinct was to laugh. His second was curiosity. "What the hell are those?" Halpin muttered into his mask. His wingman chuckled over the intercom. "Kites, Johnny, kids with kites." But the Pacific War had taught men never to ignore oddities. A feint could become a kill in seconds, and the Japanese, cornered, inventive, and desperate, still had teeth. Halpin throttled forward. The Corsair surged. The deep blue wings flashed in the sun as he slid toward Nakazawa's glider. Inside the Tsurugi's cockpit, Nakazawa felt air pressure distort around him. His canvas wing trembled from the wake turbulence. The Corsair was so close now he could see sunlight glinting off the American pilot's goggles. He stole a glance right. Kitamura was climbing, silently, steadily, like he'd rehearsed this moment in dreams. Behind him, two more Tsurugi gliders traced faint white arcs in the sky, drawn toward a point invisible to anyone but Fujikami, the minefield of anti-aircraft guns hidden along the bay's northern cliffs. The plan had never required courage, just visibility. Yet here they were, boys tightening straps, controlling breathing, adjusting altitude, as though the next 20 seconds would decide something larger than the war itself. Halpin keyed the mic. 2-3, take the high side. Let's see what these toys do. The Corsairs spread, fanning out like wolves around a flock. They could have ignored the gliders. They could have passed over and vanished into the blue, but the war had been long and boredom was deadly. Predators chase movement, and the Tsurugi seemed to flee. From the Sakawa's deck, sailors watched in stunned silence. No jeering now. No jokes. At 0729, Kitamura made the first critical move. He snapped his glider's wing into a sharp right roll, nearly suicidal at his altitude, and dove toward the cliffs. The Corsairs reacted instantly. Halpin dove after him, the others followed, automatic, instinctive, predatory. "This isn't training anymore," Fujikami whispered. "They're biting, they're actually biting." He glanced toward the north cliffs. Under canvas tarps and netting, the twin 100 mAh batteries of the 41st Anti-Air Company sat silent, hidden, perfectly angled to tear into anything low and fast. Kitamura pulled level, just meters above the water, the Tsurugi skipping air like a stone. Spray burst behind him. The Corsairs committed fully, dropping altitude, compressing formation, exactly what no experienced pilot should do over fortified shoreline. But the shoreline looked empty, peaceful. Like a postcard. Halpin closed to 50 yards, far too close, trying to identify whether the glider carried explosives. That curiosity cost him the time he would soon need. Up on the cliffs, a signal flag unfurled in the wind. Red, then white, then red again. The AA crews loaded their first shells. They waited for the final cue. Timing mattered. Too soon and the Corsairs would scatter, too late and the boys would die for nothing. Down in the bay, Nakazawa cut hard left, nearly stalling. His glider wobbled, dipped, recovered. The Corsairs followed him too. All 12 now. Every officer watching understood what that meant. The impossible had already happened. But the boys didn't know it yet. They were still just trying to stay airborne. And the signal flag on the cliff began to rise for the final time, slow, deliberate, inevitable. The flag froze mid-air. A breath held by the entire shoreline. Then drop. 2 100 barrels rolled upward in one smooth hydraulic arc, the camouflage netting slithering off like shed skin. A second battery mirrored it a heartbeat later. Breech blocks slammed home, shells hissed into chambers. The cliffside shuddered. Nakazawa didn't see any of it. He was fighting airflow, the Tsurugi bucking in ground effect turbulence. Every instinct in his hands screamed steady, steady, steady. Behind him, Halpen's Corsair dropped to barely 20 meters above sea level, prop-chewing spindrift into a silver haze. For 3 seconds, it was pure chase. No strategy, no history, just boys leading men into a corridor where intention would become execution. Range locked, someone barked from Battery 1. Corsairs at angle 550, descending. Stand by. The American pilots sensed something, some dissonance between what they were seeing and what they expected. Maybe it was the shoreline, too still, too quiet, no fishing boats, no civilians, not even gulls. Halpen frowned, flattening his turn. "What's wrong with this picture?" he muttered. Kitamura heard the wake roar behind him, so close it rattled his ribs. He didn't dare look back. You didn't look at the predator. You just kept running the line you were told to run and prayed the line held. Then the world tore open. Battery 1 fired first, 2 shells that left the barrels as streaks of light, accelerating into the low sky. A half-second later, Battery 2 unleashed a 4-gun ripple that cracked the morning like thunder in a cathedral. The shells didn't aim for the gliders. They aimed for the vacuum the Corsairs were flying into. Airburst fuses set to detonate at altitude, so precise it felt like a conjuring trick. Seawater erupted in geysers. Shrapnel scythed through the formation. A Corsair rolled hard, trailing smoke. Another clawed upward, too late to escape the blast umbrella. Halpen jerked his stick violently, but his wingman caught a fragment that sliced a coolant line. The engine coughed, sputtered, and quit. From the glider cockpits, Nakazawa and Kitamura heard none of it. Sound in a glider was intimate, wind, fabric, breath. The killing happened behind them, thunder traveling slower than fate. The Corsairs split, some climbing, some diving, some simply tumbling, too close to the cliffs to maneuver, too low to eject, too fast to think. Battery 2 recalibrated, faster than anyone expected, and fired again. 5 shells, 1 miss, 4 blossoms of white fire in the air, metal rained down in ribbons. 5 American fighters hit the water in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. On the Sakawa's bridge, no one spoke, not because they were proud or horrified or grateful, but because the brain takes time to rewrite what it believes to be possible. The officers who had laughed yesterday now stood with hands on steel rails, knuckles white, watching canvas toys steer into history. Fujikami lowered his binoculars and exhaled slow, as if letting go of months of dread in one breath. "They did it," he whispered, "children with wings." But the engagement wasn't over. 7 Corsairs remained, and those 7 were not curious anymore. They were furious. Halpen rolled high, regrouping what was left of his flight. His voice on the radio was stripped of wonder. "They're decoys, repeat decoys. The guns are on the cliffs." The surviving Corsairs fanned out again, but this time with purpose. No more herding, no more sport. 2 through 5, wipe the batteries, Halpen ordered. 6 and 7, take the kites. The boys heard the engine growl return. Closer. Hungrier. Kitamura looked once, just once over his shoulder. The 7 Corsairs were coming back, sunlight flashing off their wings, no hesitation, no confusion, no mercy. Whatever disbelief had protected them before was gone. Now came the part the manuals never mentioned. The part no Decoy pilot trained for. What do you do when the wolves stop playing? The Tsurugi wasn't built for defense. No armor. No engine. No weapons. Just canvas, ribs, and a child strapped to history. Kitamura's glider jolted as the air thickened with prop wash. The Corsairs came in at staggered angles, one high, one low, classic Hamayan-Danville pattern. Against proper fighters, it was textbook perfection. Against cloth gliders, it was overkill. Halpin stayed high, scanning for flak signatures. He watched the cliffline instead of the kites, trusting his men to finish what curiosity had begun. The Americans had learned in minutes what the Japanese Admiralty had refused to believe for months. Decoys that provoke a response are combat assets. Nakazawa skimmed the water, wings trembling at stall speed. If he climbed, he died. If he dove, he died faster. His instructor had told them the glider's greatest weapon wasn't speed, it was unpredictability. A powered fighter expected opponents who pulled G. Not opponents who surrendered to gravity and let aerodynamics decide the arc. So Nakazawa did the unthinkable. He cut his glide. He dropped hard. The canvas wing howled as he sank into ground effect at barely a meter above the sea. Spray struck the cockpit slits, salt stinging his eyes. One Corsair overshot, its propeller chewing empty air where the glider should have been. Kitamura didn't have Nakazawa's altitude to play with. He rolled right, aiming for the bay mouth, trying to rejoin the others. His glider shuddered, too steep. A Corsair dove, guns armed, tracers stitching the water ahead of him in golden slashes. You could almost feel the bullets cutting heat into the morning air. From the cliffs, the 41st Anti-Air Battery tracked the remaining fighters, but their firing angle was ruined. The Corsairs were too close to the gliders. Friend and foe merged into one trembling geometry of youth and steel. A gun crew chief spat a curse. "Can't fire, we'll hit the boys." Down in the bay, Fujikami watched the impossible math unfold. If the batteries fired, the boys died. If they held, the Americans finished the job themselves. His binoculars quivered, rage or fear, even he didn't know. Halpin keyed the mic again. His voice had changed. Not the curious hunter from earlier. This was a man trying to restore order to a universe that had just betrayed him. 6-7 finished the decoys, the rest with me on the cliffs. That order was the pivot. The moment decoys became targets of respect. Kitamura heard the engine scream behind him. It was so close the vibration shook loose a pencil from its clip on the cockpit frame. He smelled burning oil, felt heat. And then luck. Or instinct. Or some mixture of terror and youth that no doctrine could replicate. He pulled into a climbing turn so steep it should have snapped the wing. The canvas flexed, ribs groaned, glue strained. The Corsair dipped to follow, but its prop wash slammed the glider sideways, knocking Kitamura into a half-spin. The spin saved him. The tracer burst went wide, carving the sky instead of the boy. Nakazawa, still hugging the sea, finally found altitude in the form of a rising thermal off the cliff face. He rode it, feeling the wing catch, like the glider had remembered it was meant to fly. 7 Corsairs. 4 Tsurugi. No doctrine. No manuals. Just velocity and instinct and the unbearable reality of late 1945. Up on the cliffs, the battery chief hesitated a final time. "Sir, orders." Fujikami didn't blink. "Hold fire, the boys are still fighting." Even he didn't know what he meant by fighting. Surviving. Resisting. Matter-of-factly rewriting the purpose of a machine built only to be seen. Then came the radio burst from the western lookout. Urgent, breathless, impossible. Unidentified bogies, bearing 80, speed high, altitude low. Fujikami snapped toward the horizon. New engines. New silhouettes. Not Corsairs. Not gliders. Not Japanese Navy. And as the shapes resolved through the haze, a terrible truth fell into place, one that would change the next 90 seconds of the boys' lives again. The decoys were no longer the only distraction in the sky. The shapes broke through the morning glare, sleek, fast, and hunting low over the water. Twin booms, slender fuselage, and long wings like blades. P-38 Lightnings. American long-range interceptors. A flight of 4, likely returning from a photo recon sweep over the Rukius. Nakazawa blinked twice, trying to make sense of it. The war had been full of coincidences, but this felt like some cosmic overclocking, predators falling into predators, boys trapped between teeth. Halpin saw them too. He swore into his mask. Lightnings meant guns, speed, and fresh fuel. If the Corsairs stayed tangled with the gliders and the cliffs, they risked being bracketed. The battlefield, which moments ago he thought he controlled, was fracturing like glass. On the cliffs, Fujikami understood instantly. 2 American groups in the same airspace was disaster for everyone. Friend or foe didn't matter to the Lightning Squadron. They would shoot at what moved or break away to avoid the trap entirely. Either path rewrote the scene. Signal the batteries, he snapped. New targets, hold until I say. The P-38s came slicing in from the east, 4 silver arrows throwing sunlight in violent flashes. Their engines had a different timbre than the Corsairs, higher pitched, crisp, like the sky itself was being sharpened. Kitamura's cockpit trembled. His spin bled away, the Tsurugi leveling, fluttering. Out of the corner of his eye he tracked the lightnings sliding overhead, contrails smeared into thin chalk lines behind them. For a moment, they didn't even notice the gliders. The Corsairs drew their gaze, blue shapes clustered too close to the cliffs to make sense. Halpin split his remaining flight without ceremony. 3 and 4 on me, 5 take high cover, 6 and 7 keep pressure on the kites. He banked toward the lightnings, a gesture equal parts warning and territory claim. The P-38 leader answered with an aggressive dive, not quite hostile, but certainly not polite. 2 war eagles circling the same kill. For 10 seconds, the sky became a negotiation. Blue wings against silver. Experience against instinct. Predator against predator. The boys were beneath all of that, silent, featherweight, nearly forgotten. And then their invisibility broke. A lightning overshot low and spotted Kitamura's Tsurugi. The glider was moving too controlled to be debris, too clean to be wreckage, too delicate to be a weapon, yet it had a pilot inside, eyes wide, body rigid, wings trembling over the water. The lightning waggled once. Confusion. Recognition. Then disbelief. Halpin took the moment, cut in front of the lightning's nose, forcing it to climb. A silent message, ours. Above the bay, the lightnings regrouped, 4 silver falcons swiveling in a slow, predatory circle. They weren't leaving. They wanted to see how this played out, or shape it, or claim it. Fujikami read the situation and felt a coldness rise under his ribs. With 2 American flights in the same pocket of sky, the next decision wouldn't be about bait or humiliation. It would be about escalation. If the Corsairs committed to finishing the gliders and the lightnings intervened, the cliffs would get dragged into a 3-way knife fight their batteries couldn't track. He whispered to no one. Gods, their children, don't make them the fuse. But fate has no such mercy for boys in 1945. Because the next move didn't come from Halpin or the lightning leader or Fujikami. It came from the smallest voice in the smallest aircraft. Nakazawa, barely 16, barely airborne, caught the thermal lifting off the bay's cliffs. His wing tipped, canvas breathing. He rose just enough for every pilot in the sky to see him in full silhouette. And there, in that impossible arc, glider against sun, boy against war, something shifted. Halpen's eyes narrowed. The Lightning leader's jaw locked. Fujikami gripped the bridge rail. A child had just reclaimed agency in a battlefield designed for men. Which meant the next decision wouldn't be tactical. It would be moral. And those are the ones pilots fear the most. Nakazawa climbed until his glider kissed the edge of stall, the canvas wing trembling, angle shallow, sun haloing everything with that surreal gold reserved for war photographs and last moments. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to be seen. Halpen's Corsair closed from the left, nose pointed, guns cold but ready. The Lightning leader matched from the right at a respectful distance, canopy glass glittering. For one fragile heartbeat, 3 aircraft, one of spruce and cloth, 2 of steel and Pratt & Whitney, held formation as if posing for a monument no one would ever build. Kitamura's voice crackled over the short-range glider set, breathless and raw. "Hiroshi down, they'll kill you." But Nakazawa didn't descend. He leveled. And in that leveling, he crossed a boundary that manuals never mention, the point where a target becomes a pilot, and a pilot becomes a human being, and war becomes embarrassed of itself. Halpen hesitated. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. He could see the boy's face now, bare, windburned, absurdly young, too young to shave, too young to die for strategy. He toggled the trigger guard with his thumb, and for reasons he could not articulate, not then, not after, he left it open. He did not arm the guns. Above, the Lightning leader rolled, flashed his wingtips twice, an informal signal pilots used in the strange twilight spaces between hostility and respect. The Corsair behind Halpen didn't understand the nuance. He dove to fire, tracer belts already spinning. Halpen jerked hard, cutting him off, nearly colliding canopy to canopy. On the cliff battery, Fujikami saw the geometry break, his chest locked. One wrong burst and the glider would cease existing. No body, no wreck, just a splash and a name lost in dispatches. The Lightning leader saw it too. He peeled down past Halpen, cutting between the eager Corsair and the boys, claiming space with arrogance only American horsepower could afford. What followed wasn't combat, not even negotiation. It was a standoff made entirely of hesitation. A battlefield built of disbelief. The bay wind stiffened, pushing the gliders seaward. Kitamura recovered enough altitude to rejoin Nakazawa's flank. 2 other Tsurugi, silent until now, rose from shadow and drifted into loose formation. 4 fragile silhouettes against 7 Corsairs and 4 Lightnings. Halpen keyed his mic, voice low. "Let them go." His wingman spat back. "Like hell, they're enemy aircraft." Halpen didn't shout, he didn't need to. "They're children in kites." The Lightning leader answered for his own side with a slow barrel roll, showy but definitive. It meant, "We won't fire unless you do." And suddenly, every pilot in the sky realized they had crossed into territory the doctrine books never prepared them for. Doctrine deals with machines. Strategy deals with outcomes. But war, real war, is decided by men, and men carry shame. Halpen leveled out above the boys. Japanese gliders break for home, now. Kitamura didn't respond. Nakazawa didn't move. They were trained to be seen, not spoken to. No manual had taught surrender by silence. So the Lightnings made the next move. All 4 dove as one, engines screaming, prop arcs flashing, straight toward the inlet the boys had come from. Not an attack. An escort. Halpen held position until the gliders followed, one by one, as if pulled by an invisible hand. The Corsairs trailed last, shepherding a retreat that no flag officer would ever admit occurred. Fujikami watched, throat tight with something that was not victory, but also not defeat. It was closer to the feeling of recovering a photograph one believed burned. The gliders slipped into the inlet, skimming the cliffs until the bay swallowed them whole. Only after they vanished did the first Corsair break off and climb. Then the second. Then Halpen. The lightnings left last, turning south, contrails dissolving like chalk in rain. When the sky was empty, the shoreline finally exhaled. Down on the Sakawa, sailors murmured prayers, not for triumph, but for reprieve. Only one question remained, blooming like smoke in the space all wars leave. What do you call a victory that refuses to kill its opponent? There was no doctrine for that. The boys landed in silence. No cheers. No brass bands. No fanfare. Just the hiss of tires and skids against wet earth, canvas wings folding like exhausted birds, and the small, shaking sounds of children realizing they were still alive. Nakazawa unstrapped slowly, fingers stiff, breath shallow. When his boots hit the ground, his knees buckled, not from wounds, but from the delayed weight of everything that should have killed him and didn't. Kitamura reached him first, both of them laughing and crying in the strangled way only boys who survive men's wars can manage. Officers jogged over, expecting reports or damage assessments or something suitably military. But when they reached the gliders and saw who climbed out, 16, 17, 18, something faltered behind their stern expressions. Colonel Harada, who had once dismissed the Tsurugi program as embarrassing pageantry, stood stiffly at the landing strip's edge. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he offered the smallest gesture the hierarchy allowed, a bow, shallow and brief, respect without apology. The boys returned it with one far deeper. Children apologizing to the machinery of war for surviving in the wrong direction. Word of the engagement filtered through the fleet by noon. Officers debated tonnage and tactics, kills and losses, probabilities and doctrine. 5 Corsairs destroyed, no gliders lost, 2 American flights disengaged without finishing the job. A victory. A stalemate. A spectacle. History would never agree. But the detail that mattered most didn't appear in dispatches. The moment enemy pilots decided not to kill children in cloth planes, because that choice, unwritten, untrained, uncommanded, revealed something war spends years trying to bury, the thinness of the line between monster and man. That night, in a bunker lit by acetylene lamps, Fujikami wrote the after-action summary. His pen scratched the paper in crisp naval triangles until he reached the final line. There he paused, considering facts that didn't fit into boxes. Finally, he wrote, Decoy pilots demonstrated exceptional composure. Enemy behavior atypical. Engagement concluded without finality. Without finality. A phrase that sounded like surrender to no one and mercy to everyone. Across the sea, on an American carrier deck, Halpin filed his own report. He said nothing about children, nothing about kites. Nothing about the moment a boy climbed into sunlight and made 12 pilots hesitate. He ended simply, no further action. War historians would later argue over Operation Tan No. 2, how an improvised decoy unit disrupted air superiority, how anti-air coordination outperformed doctrine, how gliders became weapons without firing a shot. But the boys never framed it that way. For Kitamura and Nakazawa, the story shrank to quieter dimensions. The smell of salt, the sting of wind, the shudder of canvas, the sound of engines, the unbearable nearness of death, and the impossible luxury of being recognized as pilots rather than targets. And long after the war ended, after surrender and rebuilding, and years no one planned for, one truth remained unargued. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon on a battlefield is not firepower, but visibility. Because once the enemy sees you as human, the calculus changes. And war hates nothing more than a changed calculus.